Most gardeners are, well, kind of addicted to feeding plants instead of building soil, and it's costing them yield, flavor, and resilience. I see it all the time. Someone throws down a balanced synthetic fertilizer, watches their lettuce explode for, 3 weeks, and then wonders why it bolts early, attracts aphids, or tastes like watered-down cardboard. The mistake isn't that they're feeding their crops, it's that they're bypassing the soil biology that actually makes nutrients stable, available, and balanced. And the ancient soil trick that makes chemical fertilizer obsolete isn't a secret formula in a bag. It's disciplined compost integration, applied with intention, at the right rates and supported by microbial life. This isn't fluffy organic vibes. It's soil carbon management and nutrient cycling that honestly outperforms synthetics in real gardens. And if you care about real results, not just green leaves, subscribe to the Farm Logic channel now, because this is the kind of practical soil strategy that compounds year after year. The reason compost beats synthetic fertilizer has nothing to do with ideology and everything to do with nutrient stability. When you apply a typical 10-10-10 synthetic blend, you're delivering soluble nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium that dissolve immediately. Plants take up a burst. The rest leaches, volatilizes, or locks up. In raised beds especially, where soil volume is limited, that surge and crash cycle stresses roots. I've measured nitrate spikes in early spring beds that drop by half after 2 heavy irrigations. Now compare that to mature, biologically active compost. Finished compost typically runs around 111 to 211 in NPK, but that number is honestly a bit misleading because the nutrients abound in organic matter. They're released slowly through microbial digestion. Instead of a spike, you get a controlled feed tied to soil temperature and moisture. When the soil warms and roots are active, microbes are active. That synchronization alone changes everything. Here's how I actually apply it in a small backyard garden. In a 4x8 raised bed, which gives you 32 square feet, I add about 1 cubic foot of finished compost per 10 square feet in spring. That works out to roughly 3 cubic feet for the entire bed. I spread it evenly over the surface, about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch thick, and lightly incorporate it into the top 2 inches of soil with a broad fork or hand rake. I'm not flipping the bed, I'm not tilling deep, I'm feeding the topsoil where most feeder roots and microbial life actually live. That rate alone, repeated every season, builds organic matter steadily. I've taken beds from 2% organic matter to over 6% in 3 years using this exact approach. Once you cross that 5% threshold, moisture retention changes dramatically. In midsummer, my compost-built beds need irrigation roughly 30% less often than adjacent beds I tested with synthetic fertilizer only. The second part of this ancient trick is that compost isn't just fertilizer, it's structure. In heavy clay soil, adding 2 inches of compost per year for 2 consecutive seasons, then dropping back to 1 inch annually, will completely change root penetration. I've grown carrots in former brick clay that now fork only when I forget to thin properly. In sandy soil, compost acts like a sponge. 1% increase in organic matter can hold roughly 16,000 to 20,000 gallons of water per acre. Even scaled down to backyard size, that translates into real drought resilience. And here's where modern nutrition hacks fall apart. You'll hear advice about feeding tomatoes with high phosphorus bloom boosters or pushing leafy greens with high nitrogen synthetic blends. I've run side-by-side tests. In one bed, I applied a water-soluble 20-20-20 every 2 weeks at label rate. In the adjacent bed, I applied compost at the rates I just described, plus a single mid-season top dress of 1/2 inch around heavy feeders like tomatoes and squash. The synthetic bed produced faster early growth, but by mid-season the compost bed had thicker stems, darker foliage, and fewer pest issues. Brix readings, if you test plant sap sugar levels, were consistently higher in the compost bed. Higher bricks correlates with better flavor and better pest resistance. That's not theory, that's measured. The real magic happens when you stop disturbing the soil and let fungal networks develop. In long-term beds where compost is surface applied and soil isn't tilled, you start seeing visible mycelium in early spring. Those fungal threads extend root systems far beyond their physical reach. Synthetic salts can suppress that fungal activity. High salt index fertilizers create osmotic stress in the soil solution. Fungi don't like that. Compost feeds them. If you want to take this further, inoculate compost with a simple compost tea drench at transplant. I'm not talking about brewing some complicated recipe. I use 5 gallons of dechlorinated water, 1 shovel of finished compost in a mesh bag, and a tablespoon of unsulfured molasses. Aerate for 24 hours with a basic aquarium pump. Then drench each transplant hole with about 1 cup of that liquid before planting. In hydroponic terms, think of this as priming the rhizosphere. Yes, I said hydroponics. And this is where people think organic systems fall apart. I've run deep water culture systems and cocoa coir drip systems. Pure synthetic hydroponics can produce rapid growth, but it requires constant monitoring of EC and pH. Small mistakes show up fast. In a cocoa system, amended with 10 to 15% high-quality vermicompost by volume, I've seen more stable pH drift and stronger root mass. The vermicompost buffers nutrients and introduces microbial activity that moderates nutrient uptake. You're not replacing the entire hydronutrient solution with compost. That's unrealistic. But integrating biologically active inputs reduces the fragility of the system. Plants don't just need ions in solution, they evolved with microbes managing those ions. One common mistake serious gardeners still make is over-applying compost. More is not always better. If your compost isn't fully finished, if it still smells sour or heats up when piled, you can tie up nitrogen temporarily. I always check that compost has an earthy smell, crumbly texture, and stable temperature before application. If you're unsure, let it cure another month. Immature compost can cause yellowing that people misdiagnose as nitrogen deficiency and then overcorrect with synthetic feed. That's how the cycle starts. Another correction: stop chasing exact NPK ratios. Plants don't read fertilizer labels. In biologically active soil, nutrients cycle dynamically. A soil test every 2 to 3 years is enough for most home gardens. If phosphorus is already high, which is common in compost-heavy systems, back off manure-based composts and switch to leaf mold or plant-based compost for a season. Balance matters, but you manage it through inputs over time, not quick fixes. Let's talk yields, because ideology doesn't matter if production drops. In my own trials with determinate tomatoes in 20-gallon grow bags, synthetic-only feeding produced about 12 pounds per plant on average. Compost-based feeding with 1 mid-season vermicompost top dress produced between 13 and 15 pounds per plant, with noticeably thicker skins and longer shelf life. Peppers showed similar patterns. Leafy greens like spinach and lettuce had slower initial growth but longer harvest windows before bolting. Flavor differences are not subtle. Once you've grown carrots in soil built with compost for 5 consecutive seasons, going back to salt-fed soil tastes flat. You can measure it, but you don't need to. The density and aroma give it away. The long game is where this ancient trick really outperforms. Synthetic fertilizer requires repeated purchase and application. Compost builds a system. After 5 years of disciplined compost integration, I've cut supplemental feeding in half. Beds that used to need mid-season nitrogen boosts now carry crops through on spring applications alone. That's because organic matter acts as a nutrient bank, and this is not nostalgia. Civilizations farmed for centuries before synthetic nitrogen existed. They relied on composted plant residues, animal manures, and rotational systems to maintain fertility. We abandoned that knowledge for convenience, not because it stopped working. If you're serious about replacing chemical fertilizer, start with one bed. Apply compost at 1/2 to 3/4 inch depth each season. Stop deep tilling. Mulch with shredded leaves or straw to protect that soil surface. Observe moisture retention, pest pressure, and yield over a full year. Then compare honestly. You'll find that plants grown in biologically active soil are sturdier, less reactive, and more forgiving. That resilience is what makes synthetic fertilizer obsolete, not because chemicals can't grow plants, but because they can't build soil. If this kind of practical, experience-tested growing knowledge helps you produce better food, subscribe to the Farm Logic YouTube channel and share this video with another serious gardener. The more growers who understand how to build soil instead of just feed plants, the better our food and our gardens will be year after year.